A very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It is quite early here in London today. I thought I would just regale you with a few ideas and revelations and mysteries, and tell you about one of the big mysteries that is put there in the Bible, seated there in the New Testament. Um, and it's quite an interesting one. And of course, the mysteries, anyway, the idea of the mysteries, the notion of mysteries the in the holy texts are talked about a lot, many times. Paul talks of mysteries. Matthew and Luke refer to a great mystery. Um, I hope the echo in here isn't too bad. I need to figure out how exactly I'm going to do these videos, by the way. Just very quickly, I'm experimenting at the moment with different ways of doing these. I'm currently on StreamYard. I do like this platform. It's pretty cool. Using my phone as a webcam. So hopefully the picture quality is quite good, but I understand it is quite an echoey room. So forgive me for that. I will be working on this going forward. But mysteries, the great mystery, Christ, the nature of Jesus, the nature of Christ. Is there a difference? Are the stories all made up? That is one of the heavier issues I'm trying to tackle early on in this new kind of wave of videos I'm going to be making. I'm going to be making quite a few, hopefully, over the next few months. We're going to try and separate out the literal interpretation of the Bible that to all intents and purposes, appears to have come well over 100 years after Jesus is supposed to have died. The earlier Christian writers, St. Paul, Jude, Hebrews, and so on, don't appear to be talking about gospel within a gospel narrative. We don't see, as I've expressed before, many of the narratives there, the stories of Jesus, his parables, the miracles, what he does, his sojourns through the wilderness and into Jerusalem. None of that is picked up by the early letter writers. What is behind these? What are behind these stories? It would appear to me to be that they are great moral teachings, many of them fabricated on great myths. This is why they garnered so much regard and respect and popularity during the first few centuries. This is why Christianity really spread so widely and so quickly. It's because the Greeks largely probably knew these stories already, and the Romans, sorry, I should say Romans more than Greeks, but in a Greco-Roman world, right? The Greeks and the Romans and the Christians and their overall mythologies, the symbology of Jesus and so on, relate back to many pagan deities. There's been a great talk about this. There have been many debates over this over time. If you remember, Zeitgeist came out upwards of 10 years ago now, talking about these very things, got many things wrong. But a diligent, scholarly kind of minded person going into these subjects is going to find that there are indeed huge numbers of parallels, and indeed a story that can be told. And I hope to tell this story in coming weeks about exactly where the mythologies intertwined and interlaced from Egypt down to through the Greeks, through Dionysus and so on, into Roman gods, and how this hybrid concept of Jesus came about in a number of different ways. And what my work, I'm hoping to do with my work, is show you precisely where lots of this came from, with a preponderance of evidence that you can get Bayesian with, you can assign probabilities to. One second. And really begin to understand the coincidence versus actual or authentic, like writing of a history here is from. Sorry, the whether this is just coincidental, whether there are just strange parallels that just come about, or whether there is indeed engineering here, a method behind this, the creation of these new myths for a Gentile audience, coming out of the Judaic world. Okay, probably principally from Judea, because there is so much Judean content, like content in Christianity. Christ, many of the early fathers and so on, reference the Old Testament so many times that it's obviously hugely, the forebear of Christianity obviously is Judaism. We don't need to go on with that. One of the great mysteries, though, besides the history, and remember very quickly, the first gospel comes to us through a guy called Marcion. The first commentary at all on a gospel comes via people like Irenaeus. Well, Irenaeus, first of all, on Marcion's gospel. Before that, we get Justin Martyr talking about the late 150s, 160s. He does reference gospels or memoirs of the apostles that were called gospels about 3 times, but he doesn't assign names to these gospels. He doesn't tell us how many there are. He does appear to quote gospels, and I'm going to go into that. That's very interesting, because you'll hear that about 80 to 100 times in the 3 works we have of him, his first and second apology and dialogue with Trypho, he references the Bible about 80 to 100 times. That's not really true. Often these are repeated references. If we take away many of these broad general statements of Christians, like the Eucharist statements and stuff like this, you'll get a hell of a lot less in Justin. He doesn't really appear to know much about written works, and when he says so-called gospels, it kind of makes us wonder whether he actually has these gospels in front of him and whether he's read them or not. He is vague on this point. Irenaeus comes along, and then he's talking, and then that's when you get the four-square edition of gospels for the first time. That's in 180-ish. Here's the deal, the mystery. One of the big mysteries is that Jesus, according to the earlier letter writers, appears to have been crucified, made into and again, I've explained this in some of my earlier videos, brought down or emptied himself. I think Philippians uses the word emptied himself into a human form, to be like a human, not a human, but to appear flesh in a kind of probably celestial flesh kind of context, and then crucified not by Judeans, not by Romans, but by archonic forces. And I will elucidate this in further videos. But the thing is, it's said that he is crucified in Revelation at the beginning of time. Paul seems to hint at this mystery of Christ, and this mystery that nobody knew, and that Jesus, again, it's really interesting, this, because when you get down to it, and you look at Marcion's theology, he appears to have not been particularly friendly to Jehovah and the Judaic God, this storm god, this god of the sands and the desert, and the god of, and this is Egyptian, this is all very harkens back to Egyptian deities and so on. This god of foreigners. Now, the foreigners were shepherds in Egypt, and they do appear to have existed, and they were called Hyksos, kings. They were kings, literally. And the parallels between true, like, historical figures in the form of the Hyksos and the Egyptians, these late kind of 14th dynasty to 17th-ish dynasty king pharaohs who came from foreign lands, we actually have references to that in the historical record and in archaeology. they worshipped a god called Set. That's really interesting. This, according to the Egyptians, was not the overlord, god of all, emperor, highest, whatever order, sky daddy. That was not him. This god created this world. In some renditions, was given the task of creating this world. Remember, we hear that Satan is the god of this world in the Bible. These concepts begin to appear in some kind of discernible order. So Set being Satan, being I suppose the god of this world. And Jesus says in the Bible as well, when he's talking to the Jews, he said, "You are of your own god, Satan. You are of your God." Say, well, what does that mean? How can that be? He's Jewish himself. He believes in God. But he's telling the Jews that they have a different God. What's that about? This notion then that Jesus would come along to early Gnostics and come as a redeemer, not from the God of this world, the creator of this world, is quite interesting. And Marcion Young created his antithesis, which it looks as though, very much in Irenaeus's eyes, was supposed to combat, fight the Old Testament. He was making the New Testament, this new covenant. And I'm going to read to you something before I end. I don't want this to be too long, but we're going to have a look at some of the things. As we probably know by now, the Old Testament God was involved in, and it wasn't good stuff. He was vicious. He was genocidal. He was infanticidal. He wrecked whole countries, whole cities, destroyed them, everyone inside them. We'll have a read. And you'll begin to see now what I think one of the problems early Christians, a lot of these Christians who are probably the first Christians, actually had. And St. Paul may well have been one of these Christians. He doesn't know the gospel stories. These come later on. They do appear in the historical record as well later on. This is under a Greco-Roman hand as well. And the gospels are written in Greek, and they don't appear to have been written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John at all. Again, evidence exists to support this claim. Let's have a look at this. On one thing as well, lots of these Egyptians and these Greeks in early times were looking at the Judaic God and looking and saying, well, no, your God is the God that we have, and we call him Set, and he's a donkey god. Alexamenos worships his God. Just Google that, and you'll find something quite interesting. Probably one of the earliest depictions in the archaeological record of Jesus. Have a look. It's quite interesting. Might be a resonance of truth there. A modern reading, this is from my book coming up very soon, modern reading of the books of the Old Testament will leave many feeling precisely the same way. In certain regards, the Old Testament God is a moral reprobate. He brings great floods, wiping out all, but Noah and his family performs a fairly heinous loyalty gaslighting on his beloved Abraham and his son, commits genocide on everyone, including presumably innocent children in Sodom and Gomorrah, and kills Onan for refusing to impregnate his brother's widow in Genesis. In Exodus, he brings great plagues across the whole of Egypt. In Deuteronomy 4:24, he states plainly, For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. In Numbers, he again goes scorched earth, punishing whole families for Korah's rebellion against Moses and Aaron. In this book, showing particular brutality to the Midianites, now kill all the boys and the quote, now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. And this is in Numbers 31:17-18. That's crazy. In Numbers, this is going on. In Numbers 31:17-18, in Joshua, he destroys the whole city of Jericho, women, children, all of it. Samuel records the mass killing commanded by God of both the Amalekites and Israelites via plagues, 70,000. And in Kings 2, 2 bears mauled to death 42 boys for mocking Elijah, who curses them. So Elijah curses these boys, these young boys. These are not teenagers, 16 or whatever. These are young kids. 42 of them get mauled by bears at the behest of Elijah, who curses them. God does a little arranging. Bears come out of the wilderness and kill all these boys. That's crazy. That's fucked up. Sorry, but between divine punishments involving collective genocide, general commandments involving morally abhorrent acts, and other jealous and vindictive behavior, the complete list of Jehovah's shortcomings totals far more than just those above. It is not reason. It is. It is not. Is it not reasonable that some would have concerns about with not just these, but wider questions such as the mystery of iniquity too? Many early Christians were invariably questioning these problems, and thinkers such as Marcion were engaged in wider discussion, trying to square this circle. His antidote was to stipulate that there were two gods, a creator, sometimes called the demiurge, who was imperfect, and the true God of all, a God of love, of truth, of light, Jesus. This Jesus character, which we first really see through Marcion. This is highly simplified view, but it appears to be the crux of the literalist grievance. Sorry, I've missed a bit. Right? For them, the argument appears to be based on blind dogma and double standards. Was Marcion and whoever wrote his gospel endeavoring to upgrade the teachings while still honoring selected elements of the original books? It seems manifestly true, and most modern Christians would agree with this sentiment. If this is true, then Marcion might have been one of Christianity's first real innovators. So, two gods, one God, the God of all, a God of love, of pure, of goodness, of order, truth, of caring for every single little atom of his creation. And then this other God who is quite happy to just throw dice, commit crimes, be completely brutal in his exacting of the law and of wiping out non-Jews and so on. Big problems for Christianity if we're trying to look at the Old Testament and really view it through a prism of real moral teaching. It gets extremely difficult very quickly. The New Testament is slightly different. There are, and I will go through many of the problems with Jesus in the New Testament as well, and they appear often to be overlays and interpolations, and even, I mean, we're probably talking of 4 books here that were heavily edited. John's gospel appears to be more Gnostic than the others. Again, this is not news to a lot of people. Mark and Marcion's Luke, he's called the Evangelion to Marcion, but it's a kind of Lucan gospel. Mark and Luke there have quite a lot of synergy. But we begin to see in the 2nd century, it's only in the 2nd century this happens, that the Bible begins to really come together, and then it's referenced by people. There are readers that we can see in the second part of the 2nd century of the Bible for the first time. The 1st century has none of this information, doesn't really carry any of this knowledge. There were, we can assume, in the 1st century, at the end of the 1st century, Christians that were beginning to make their way onto the scene. But as far as evidence goes, we don't have any. We are speculating. And obviously, Pliny the Younger is the first non-Christian to talk about Christians. And he does mention Christians. But he doesn't tell us straightforwardly that Jesus was a person. he doesn't mention the word Jesus. He talks about Christ, and these Christians worship this Christ, meaning anointed, as a deity, which is quite vague. And then he doesn't really talk about what Christ is anymore. He's talking about what he should do with Christians, because he doesn't know any legal precedent. This guy was a lawyer. He's steeped in Roman law. It appears to him, it appears to me, it appears to many people that he doesn't know how to treat Christians. How would that be if a few decades earlier Nero was going absolutely ape on Christians, using them as human torches all around Rome? There is no memory of this in any contemporary or near contemporary Roman authorities or authors, historians, commentators. So we have a problem here, guys. But anyway, the central mystery, one of them was that Jesus was sent not into the world, but into the world through his Spirit to come into humanity and help to salvage humanity through this God's Son, the God, the real God, and help Christians who began to understand these knowers, truly people, as Paul said, these guys, his people were special. They were elected. They had revelations. His apostles, not the apostles of the New Testament, not the disciples, but his apostles were people who got the mystery, right? So, and I just think this is an extremely interesting story. I call myself a Gnostic. I have in my own way been touched profoundly. But the history of this is absolutely mind-blowing. It's mind-boggling. It's the single most amazing series of stories, and the history accompanying them is unbelievably interesting. I wish to share that with you over time. Have a great day, guys. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I'm going to be toying and tinkering around with various ways to do these videos, and I'm going to be doing some documentaries as well. You might have seen the Jack Shepherd documentary. Well, you probably haven't, but it's there on my video, on my feed. Please take a look if you're interested. It's completely different from any of this stuff, but that's the kind of quality, hopefully a lot better than that even, that I want to be putting out on subjects just like this. So please enjoy your days. Have a great time. The sun's coming up here. Just looking into, nice view. Anyway, cool. All right. Bye-bye. Take care.